Love it or hate it, the Ford GT90 is among the most iconic concept cars that the automaker has ever produced. That's quite the achievement, considering that it's been around for well over a century. The GT90 is certainly one of the most prominent show vehicles of the 1990s. Viewers of a certain age will recognize it from Need for Speed, Gran Turismo, and Project Gotham Racing, and it went on to influence an entire generation of Ford products. This is the story of the GT90, quite possibly the greatest Ford never made. Ford made waves at the tail end of the 1970s with its groundbreaking aero-focused design language. We got a taste of it with the third-generation Mustang, but it wasn't until the release of the 1983 Thunderbird that we really saw the company embrace it. Models such as the Taurus and Sierra brought the design language to the masses, and to great success. The new look began to get stale as the years went on though. As this Haggerty article states, aero had become a much greater consideration for other automakers, effectively rendering Ford's approach moot. Something had to change if Ford wanted to regain its position as a design leader. Jack Telnack spearheaded Ford's aero revolution. This time, the task of shaking the automaker out of its rut fell to Tom Scott. He joined the company in 1973, left for AMC, and then returned to Ford sometime later. If anyone at the company could shake things up, it was him. The Haggerty article contains a quote from Patrick Lequemon, who worked with Scott at Ford in the early 1970s. He could understand engineering issues, loved aerodynamics, and was able to come up with something novel and futuristic every time. At this point, Scott was in charge of various studios throughout the company. Among these was Advanced Design, where more experimental work took place. At first, the studio wasn't sure how to go about the task at hand. Eventually, they decided to create a high-performance concept car that was free from the restrictions and corporate meddling that plagued the automaker's production models. Said car would be a 90s reimagining of the GT40, one of the most famous competition machines of all time. James Hope was a recent hire, coming aboard after graduating from CCS in 1992. This must have been one hell of a project to cut his teeth on. Hope went through the GT90's development process in an interview on the Crown Unfiltered Car Design podcast. The studio had decided that the concept would use the Jaguar XJ220 as a foundation. Most of the designers in Advanced created sketches that weren't too far removed from Ford's aero design language. Hope drew aggressive, angular cars that were inspired by aircraft like the Stealth Bomber. Neither his colleagues nor his supervisors were very fond of this new direction. This changed after upper management paid the studio a visit. They tore their work to shreds and questioned why they were still stuck in the aero theme when the brief called for something new. Hope's once polarizing sketches had now become the studio's salvation. Its engine started life in Ford's advanced powertrain department. Staff wanted to see how far it could push the then new modular engine architecture. They essentially welded together sections of two Lincoln V8s, creating a 6-liter V12. To test the new power plant, engineers placed it in a town car test mule. Now, this car wasn't stock. It had a body-on-frame chassis, rear air suspension, and larger brakes. SVT boss John Coletti learned of their exploits in early 1994 and thought it would be perfect for the GT90 project. He mandated that it had to produce no less than 600 horsepower. This wasn't going to happen, not without forced induction. Ford installed not one, not two, not three, but 4 Garrett turbochargers to help increase power figures. The V12 now produced an estimated 720 horsepower and 660 pound-feet of torque. Engine designer Bob Natkin said that they were running relatively low boost levels. 900 horsepower was not out of the realm of possibility. Ford claimed a 0 to 60 time of 3.1 seconds, a 0 to 100 time of 6.2 seconds, and a top speed of 235 miles an hour. The Peterson Automotive Museum notes that it would have been the fastest car in the world until the release of the Bugatti Veyron in 2005. Roush made the crank and camshafts. It also assembled the engine and dyno tested it. Made it to it was a 5-speed manual, the same one from the XJ220. The exhaust generated an enormous amount of heat. Ford surrounded the pipes with ceramic plates to dissipate said heat and protect the surrounding body panels. The GT90 weighed about 3,200 pounds and had a drag coefficient of 0.32. After about 6 months of development and $3 million, the team had finally completed the car. Now it was time to show it to the public. The Ford GT90 debuted at the 1995 Detroit Auto Show. In the podcast episode, Hope revealed that the company intended to drive the car on the stage and rev the engine, but it wouldn't start, so they had to push it on stage instead. This didn't stop it from making a splash at the event. Other noteworthy cars, such as the Chrysler Atlantic, Lincoln L2K, and third-generation Taurus were shown here as well. None of them resonated with the public quite like the GT90. Road and Track's Ken Zeno was in attendance as well. He laid eyes on the car and hatched an idea. The journalist waited for the crowd to disperse and asked John Coletti if he could take the car for a spin. This was an odd request on the surface, though he didn't have much to lose. The worst he could say was no. Instead, Coletti responded, "Well, it's a show car, but it was designed as a runner. Let me talk to Fred Goodnow, GT90 program manager. Then we'll see." A few months later, Zeno found himself at Ford's Desert Proving Ground in Whitman, Arizona, preparing to take the GT90 on its first extended run. He noted that the car was surprisingly spacious, lacking the large side sills that made entering cars like the Lamborghini Diablo troublesome. Its glass roof also gave the car some much-needed headroom. Forward visibility was as good as he'd seen in the supercar. Sidelines in all other directions were practically non-existent. The side mirrors didn't do a whole lot to alleviate matters either. Even still, the car was quite capable, considering that it was just a concept. It was remarkably balanced, and well sorted on the test track. Zeno even said that its suspension was better than that of some production performance cars. The GT90 may have been a show car, but the foundation for a flagship sports car seemed to be in place. Motor Trend drove the car as well. This December 1995 article made some interesting observations. The 4 wastegates were locked in the open position, so the car behaved like it had a naturally aspirated engine. Horsepower and torque figures were around the 400 range. None of the controls worked either. This even included the air conditioning. John McCormick wrote that the interior turned into a sauna, and Goodnow didn't allow him to do any sharp turns out of fear of overstressing the body. The car still drove pretty well, all things considered. If given the appropriate resources, who knew how good it might become? Ford didn't have production in mind for the GT90. It indicated as much when the car debuted. Goodnow and his colleagues at SVT remained hopeful for a limited run of cars at least. In the Road and Track article, he estimated that they'd need about $5 million to build a second one. While the first model was a show car, this one would be more of a proof of concept. It would flesh out the more experimental features, like the active aero and adaptive suspension. And this car would even have working air conditioning. It never came to be. Even still, the GT90 had more than served its purpose. Goodnow said that it convinced management of the value of having a flagship sports car in its lineup. Motor Trend quoted Goodnow as saying that he was confident there would be a new sports car program at Ford in the next 2 to 3 years. It took some time for this to come too, but it finally did, in the form of the 2005 Ford GT. Although the numbers aren't as gaudy, it was a flagship sports car heavily inspired by the GT40 that really elevated the brand. And the value of such a car is obvious. The spirit carried on to the GT of the late teens and early 20s, and, in a way, to the Mustang GTD. The GT90 was also the first car to sport the new Edge design language. This was pretty much the antithesis of Ford's aero phase. Models such as the Focus, Puma, Ka, and the Cougar left their mark and officially ushered in a new era for the automaker. And what about the car itself? After the show in Detroit, it made appearances in Frankfurt and Tokyo. Public appearances after its initial circuit run were sparse. Ford brought it to the Woodward Dream Cruise in 2002, and in 2008, it was shown at the Ford of Europe exhibit at the Goodwood Festival of Speed. It came back to the States and then immediately went to Alabama as part of the Mustang's 45th anniversary celebration. In late 2009, RM Auctions announced that the GT90 would be offered for sale. But then the car was withdrawn from sale ahead of the January 2010 auction in Arizona. Unbeknownst to the public, the automaker had been in talks to sell the car to oil and gas tycoon Brent Hayek. An article from Classic Driver detailed the acquisition process. Hayek first saw the car in 2003 at a warehouse in Dearborn. He asked if the car was for sale. A years-long negotiation started. He finally acquired the car in 2012. It was in surprisingly good condition. Only a few minor items had to be seen to. Hayek said that he received numerous offers to buy the car, several of which were far more than the car cost to build. Development expenses were pegged at $3 million, so you can imagine the numbers that were being thrown around, though he's adamant that the car is not for sale. Today, it resides at the Hayek Motorsports Museum in Ames, Oklahoma. The GT90 does make occasional trips to other museums though. The Peterson borrowed it as part of his exhibit, Modern Concepts, Future Visions of the Recent Past. This was from September 2024 to July 2025. The exhibit also included the Chrysler ME412 and Cadillac CN, two cars that are strong candidates to have their own videos.